So last night, I was working on slide decks and going over things that I was going to say this morning, and it occurred to me that I didn't really have an intro. And so I figured, that's okay, something will come to me. I'll figure it out in the morning. And then this morning I woke up and I still didn't have anything to say to intro. And I didn't want to do like the good morning, welcome to Friday at TechEd thing, because that's what most people do. And then got here and I'm walking around kind of out front. And I'm starting to get worried because now I'm starting to think, come on, come up with something. You got to have something to say when you hop up on stage before you get started. And then I stepped up a couple of minutes ago to get all mic'd up, and the speaker coordinator comes up to me. And she looks up and she says, "Morning, Brian. So you're all ready to be, witty and funny and charming, right? On this Friday at 8:30 in the morning." I looked at her and I'm like, that's kind of a high bar, isn't it? She says, "Well, they at least got your name right on the slide, didn't they?" I'm like, "Yeah." So that's the range. So when you guys are filling out your reviews at the end of this session, remember that at one end, I either need to be witty and charming and funny, but if nothing else, they did get my name right on the slide. Okay? So that's what we're shooting for, somewhere in there. But I do want to thank you all for getting up early on Friday morning. I know that this is usually one of the tougher slots to get people to come to at TechEd. Usually by this point, you've just been completely bludgeoned to death with PowerPoint slides. And unfortunately, that's exactly what I'm going to do to you for the next hour or so. But I'm going to do it with pretty pictures. So that should make everything better. And they won't all be Metro pictures in little squares. Some of them will be like screenshots of stuff. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more interesting. The goal of today's session is to take what came in the box with ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services. And if you've already deployed ADFS, which I'm hoping that most of you have, then you've probably already received some feedback from your users that say some things like, "Oh my God, that UI sucks." Or you've received some feedback from your businesses that say, "I kind of like this model, but all I need you to do is customize your infrastructure completely to my application," right? Neither of those really work well for you. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about a lot of the work that we've done inside of Microsoft with our own ADFS deployment for improving the user experience, for enabling some of the applications, for increasing some of the security scenarios, and just making generally the end-to-end logon experience, this paradigm shift, if you will, from Windows Integrated Auth to ADFS, just a little bit easier and a little bit better. So if you're not familiar with ADFS, then I am going to start off by just kind of bouncing through how ADFS works. I do recommend that you download and install it, play with it a little bit, because it is pretty powerful, especially from when you start to run into scenarios where you're looking to extend applications to the cloud or integrate with customers and partners. ADFS really provides the authentication platform that allows your applications to really just seamlessly and easily interconnect. Before I get too far, though, a little bit context about me. I do not work for the ADFS product team. So while I am more than happy to listen to your feedback and things about the features you'd like to see inside of ADFS, I actually work inside of Microsoft's IT department. So I am usually one of those people who is providing feedback to the ADFS team. One of the things that I've done working inside of IT on our internal identity and access management team for the last 10-odd years or so, one of the things that I did was I deployed our original ADFS infrastructure. And since then, I've worked with our engineer and operations teams to help evolve and grow that as a service for Microsoft applications, for our Microsoft users, accessing our SaaS vendors and other software as a service providers. And so I really come to this from the perspective of I'm the IT guy who actually installed ADFS on some servers, did the network and load balancing config, broke DNS 2 or 3 times. Every couple of years, I curse and swear at PKI because I have to go change certificates. And what I want to do is and so the purpose of this session is really to share some of the things that we've done to go kind of a little over and above, or above and beyond, just what you get in the box. To start with, if you're going to think about customizing ADFS, you really need to understand how ADFS works. And the foundation for ADFS is really that it's a web service. Okay? So if you're deploying ADFS, you deploy ADFS just like any web application. You've got a bunch of IIS servers out there. There are 2 components to it. So you can split the experience. There's an ADFS proxy server that you can use to provide an experience for internet-based users. And then there's the ADFS server itself that you use to provide the experience to internal users. And that's one of the ways, as part of that standard deployment, that we manage these experiences. The typical ADFS, what we call the bouncy slide, or the sample, is 2 companies where one company is hosting an application, and the other company has a bunch of users that need to log into that app. And so if we look at the login flow, we can start to dissect and figure out where some of these extensibility points are. The first thing that happens when a user logs into, or when a user attempts to log into an ADFS-enabled application, is they pop open a browser, they go to the app, applicationfoo.com. There's 2 options here. This is really the first extensibility point, is the configuration of this application. This application can do one of 2 things here. If you take some of the standard examples for how to build an ADFS integrated app with Windows Identity Foundation, this application will silently redirect the user to the Federation service. However, if you go talk to any line of business application developer or any web developer out there, they're going to configure their app so that this user stops and lands on an anonymous landing page. That way, they can say, welcome to application foo, whatever, and they'll give a sign-in button. And when they click the sign-in button, that's what directs to the Federation service. So that's actually our first extensibility point that we'll talk about, because that becomes very important, because the application developers tend to be very protective of what that user experience is like. Once the user's redirected to the Federation service, now we have to figure out where the user is going to authenticate at. So this Federation server may have relationships with multiple different identity providers, multiple different places that users could log in. In the consumer space, this Federation service could trust Facebook and Yahoo and Google ID and Windows Live ID. Or at your company, it may trust a whole variety of partners. So we have to go through a process called home realm discovery. Home realm discovery is very basically saying, who are you? Where do you want to go to log in? Okay, but that's also our second extensibility point. This is also usually the first thing that people want to customize, is the home realm discovery experience. Once the user's identified that, hey, I authenticate over here, then they're going to be redirected. Now, in this scenario, this is a different Federation server, but they're redirected to their sign-in page. Your sign-in page can be as simple as, give me a username and password. Okay, great. Whatever the case may be. Point being, this is the site that needs to take care of authentication. It's going to authenticate the user against AD or whatever it is, generate a token, redirects it back to the Federation server. Now, there's an interesting part here as well, because now we don't have any ASP pages. We don't have any web pages that we can mess with at this point. The rest of this transaction occurs silently through the ADFS service. However, one thing that we do have is we do have the claims pipeline. And there are a couple of places that we can customize within the claims pipeline so that we can do things like enrich authorization or redirect the user to a different experience. And so we'll talk about that. And then at the end of the day, we're getting back to what the user originally came for after all of this customization has happened, and they're redirected back to the application, they're logged in, and they get to do their job, whatever the case may be. Now, working in a federated relationship, you can see that some of the customization occurred on one side, some of the customization occurred on the other. More often than not, though, what I've found is that when you deploy a federation service, your federation server that you own gets used for both halves. Okay? So, for example, I may deploy ADFS servers to enable my users to log into Office 365. Great. Single sign-on, no problem. However, then an application's going to come along. And the application says, hey, I'm going to deploy in Windows Azure, and I need to authenticate users. Oh, OK. Then I'll take your application and wire it up to my ADFS server as well. Okay? We can do all of these things with a single instance of ADFS. And the flow is exactly the same. So the user logs in, goes to the app, redirected to the federation server, home realm discovery occurs, hits a sign-in page on the same federation server. Rules are processed, the user's logged in, rules are processed, tokens generated, sent back to the application. So this gives some idea of where in the flow we're going to look at places that we can start and stop. We've got a few extensibility points. The application landing page, whether you have one or not, becomes the first thing. HRD, or the home realm discovery page, the sign-in page, relying party rules, these are all different points in the process where we can go in and break stuff. And that's really what we're trying to do. So the scenarios that we wanted to build on top of our ADFS infrastructure. First thing we wanted to do was we wanted to just improve the UI. Our users are really picky. Actually, it's not that they're really picky. It's that blank white screens just don't really do it. Okay? So we wanted to improve the user experience. We wanted to fix the home realm discovery challenges. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit. We wanted to add mobile support. There's a lot of conversations in the industry right now around consumerization of IT. Consumerization of IT means many things to many people, but one of the things that it absolutely means is that people are logging into stuff from their phones. And so having a rich, good mobile experience was a requirement. And then also, we wanted to be able to apply our security policies, making statements like, require smart card when you're logging in from the internet to certain applications. So we wanted to add strong authentication, and we wanted to have a good experience there. There was also a recurring theme from our application teams. The application teams were very adamant that they wanted to leverage the authentication infrastructure, but they owned the end-to-end user experience. And they did not want things to happen like, they did not want the user to go to a page that was white and blue and green and well laid out, whatever their page was, and then when they clicked the sign-in button, have it go to a page that was black and dark, or with brown and red or whatever, because that's just a very jarring experience. And what we found is that when you surprise users like that, there's only one reasonable response. Hit the close button and start over. It just irritates the heck out of people, right? You don't want to surprise your users. And so understanding how we could take shared infrastructure and have a common or a consistent application experience was one of the challenges. So throughout the rest of the talk, what I'm going to do is I'm really talking about some kind of techniques and scenarios that we've used. And to start with, let's just start with the basics. When you first install ADFS, if you install ADFS in the configuration for having a proxy on the internet, or proxy for internet-facing users, and an STS for your corporate users, then straight out of the box, the first thing that you want to do is you want to configure your service so that your proxy server renders username and password forms-based logon, and that your internal servers are doing Windows integrated auth. Why? Because that's what your users expect. They expect that when they're on the internet, they're going to be prompted, and when they're on the corporate network, that everything's just going to work and it's just going to be seamless. So how do you do that? Within the web.config file, there's this section, and this section specifies the available authentication types for your ADFS service. Now, there's 4 authentication types listed here, and 2 things are important. One is that the default is whatever's listed on top. So default behavior, put it on top. If you want forms-based auth to be your default behavior, just swap it to the top. It's just that simple, okay? Or silly. Either way. We give a list of 4, only the top one matters. Except, it's not that only the top one matters, because back in, I don't know, something like 2005, when we initially deployed ADFS 1.0, and we had the similar configuration here, on our internal STS servers, one of the things that we did was we said, we only want to do integrated auth on the internal boxes. So it's not that we swapped it to the top, it's that we commented out the rest of the sections. Don't do that, because that makes those unavailable, okay? And so it breaks scenarios that we'll talk about in a little bit. So just bump it up to the top, leave the rest of them, call it good. The next section of your web.config that's really important is this area around your error page and your home realm discovery page. Now, the reason that I included the error page here is just to point out one of the challenges that we're going to have as we go along customizing things. And that is that in terms of error handling, you get one page. Whatever it points to here. You can change it, but you can only change it to one thing. Okay? For home realm discovery, you get one page. Again, whatever it is here. Okay? So one of the techniques that we had to use was to figure out how we could split the code up to render multiple experiences just within this one page, because this was all we had to work with. The other thing to know is that your home realm discovery selection is going to be cached on the client. So the way that the home realm discovery experience works is that a user goes to the application redirects them to the ADFS service where it renders the home realm discovery page, asks them, where do you want to go to log in? Once that selection is made, we cache that in a cookie that's stored for 30 days, or whatever you set this value to. The next time the user comes along, they go to the app, they've closed the browser, they've walked away, they've rebooted, whatever, they come back the next day, they go to the application, it redirects them to the ADFS server. Instead of rendering that home realm discovery experience again, we know what their setting was, we read out of the cookie, and we redirect them automatically. Why is that important? Because you just changed the user behavior. It means that the first time the user went to the application, they had one experience, and the next time they had a different experience. Sometimes that's okay, sometimes that's really bad. Remember, the things that we want is we want consistency and predictability, right? You don't want things to happen sometimes, right? Because that just drives people up the wall. Why is it that sometimes I get this page that asks me where I log in at, and other times I don't? So determining what your strategy is around HRD cookies is one of the things that you should definitely consider. What did we do at Microsoft? At Microsoft, we bumped this up to 365 days so that it didn't clear out as often. And then I'm going to talk about a lot of the optimization that we've done around HRD. Some other web config customizations that are a little more visible. So if you install ADFS by default, this is your sign-in page. Everybody say, ooh, ah, yay, it's pretty, it's white, it's boring, it's got gray gradient at the top. I don't know who designed this, but yeah, I'm wondering if they still work for us anymore. So this is the default sign-in page. Now, you can go through and do limited amounts of customization to these pages, okay? However, because the experience, or because the customizations are done inside the web config, they apply to all of the pages. So, for example, you have your default home realm discovery page. Whatever you do in the web config to one page is also going to happen to this one. You can also see from this page that this is why HRD usually is the first page that you want to customize. Remember back to the little bouncy arrow thing? This is the page where the user went to the app and then they land, they see this page. This is the one where it says, tell me where you want to go log in with. The other way of describing this page would be hit the drop down and see who all of my business partners are, right? Oh, look, you work with my competitors too. Isn't that nice? So this is the default out-of-the-box HRD page. Now, if you go into the web.config, the customization that's allowed is you can uncomment this section and you can apply a whatever it was, 600 by 100 or something like that. I don't remember the exact sizes. You can put your logo there. And if you specify a graphic for your logo, then it gets placed neatly in the middle of the page, just like that. Of course, like I said, it occurs on all of it applies to all of the pages as well. So it's not just your sign-in page. You get the exact same experience on your HRD page. If this is the level of branding and customization that you're looking for, then the web config is exactly the thing that you need. I would suggest don't use a big blue box. But that's just me. I'm a style guy. Can't you tell? Blue shirt, right? Okay. So we decided that probably wasn't going to work well enough for us. And we wanted to do some other things. So the first clue that we had was that the login page is just an ASP.NET page. Hey, we've got people who know how to customize ASP.NET. They can apply our branding. They can apply our templates. They can take all of the components that exist on that HRD page and put them into something that doesn't look as boring and plain and white. And so this is one of the designs that we came up with. As you can see, all we really did was we moved things to the right, we added some logos, we changed some text, right? But it's a much better experience. It's a much richer, different experience. The experience on the left is pretty harsh. We could also, purely using CSS, we added some mobile detection logic that said, hey, if you're coming from a mobile device, use that CSS file instead of this one. And we could render the same experience, have a consistent experience for our mobile devices. Same thing applies to tablets, iPads, whatever. Okay? So just by doing a little bit of ASP.NET development, we went through, we added a picture, we changed the background to black, we rearranged the fields a little bit, and it's not so brutal anymore. But we also decided that this was a great time that we could add some capability, because one of the things that was recurring feedback for us for ADFS, especially from mobile applications, was that every time you logged into a mobile app from your phone, you had to type your 10-character complex password. And that was just killing people, right? So we wanted to figure out how we could do something along the lines of keep me signed in. Now, we actually ended up calling it remember my username, but I didn't update the screenshot. The screenshot says keep me signed in. But remember my username and password is really much more descriptive of what the solution is. So again, this was really just modifying the existing ASP pages to say when the user types in their username and password, when they click submit, before you actually make the login call, take their username and password, encrypt it using a local using certificates on the local, use an encryption certificate on the server, take that encrypted blob, store it with a timestamp on the device. That way, when the user comes back, we could render this page, and the first thing that we'll do is check for the presence of that cookie. If we have that cookie, we can read the encrypted blob of data out of it, decrypt it on our server, and replay those credentials back into the forms page and automatically log the user in. Now, this seems kind of hokey, and it is kind of hokey, but remember, this isn't a change to the ADFS product. This was an attempt by an IT department to compensate for a limitation of the product. The product doesn't give us any kind of support for Keep Me Signed In. So this was something that we had to come up with for a way to manage this when we knew that we were always going to be rendering this forms-based logon page. But we were able to build Keep Me Signed In, and then we decided to go one step a little bit further, and we took that timestamp and were able to have different policies for applications for Keep Me Signed In. So if you're going to an application that that has very low impact kind of data, you're accessing your phone to find out what the menu is in the diner or the cafe, right, on campus. Who cares? Great. That can have a long replay time. On the other hand, if you're accessing mission critical data for some of our financial reports, maybe Keep Me Signed In only works for 8 hours, right? That's good because that means that once a day, the user still has to type in their creds. We'll update the cookie and do all that underneath, but we can have this granularity of security policies for our Keep Me Signed In feature. Whole realm discovery is always an interesting challenge. As I said earlier, this is where the user goes and identifies where they're going to log in at. At Microsoft, we generally have two kinds of users who come and access our application. Actually, I guess three, technically. Three kinds of users who come and access our applications. Either our employees, our business partners, or just kind of end users, right? For our employees, we want them to log in with their AD accounts, Active Directory accounts. For our business partners, we want them to log in at their ADFS server with their corporate accounts. And for the end users, the consumers, we typically want them to log in using Windows Live IDs. So these were the three options. But note that within those options, those federated business partners, there could be many of those. We have upwards of 700 federated business partners right now. So how do we determine those? Well, we took a playbook took a page out of the playbook from many of the existing websites that are out there that have had to address this problem, and we say, give us your username, give us your email address. If you're a federated business partner, we take your email address, we drop the first part, we take the domain, we look up your domain in a lookup table to figure out which partner you correspond with, and then we'll redirect you off in that direction. So if you are a user from Dell, then you type in joe@dell.com. We take Dell.com, we look up, we find the Federation server identifier for the Dell Federation, and we redirect you off that way. If you are joe@hp.com, we redirect you off that way. This is how we can get around that drop-down box. Okay? Again, all of this is just implemented in ASP.NET, just doing lookup tables, right? There's nothing really overly complicated about this. This was really more about the approach and the technique. And then again, the same thing applies on our mobile devices, because we want to have this, we want to render a common experience. We want to have the same experience for mobile that we do for our for our full version HRD pages. But there was a problem with this. This worked great for about 35 seconds until the first application came along. Because the first application said, my application page is white with blue and green, and they click sign in and your HRD page is black. And that's a very jarring experience, and I don't want that to happen. We had a 100% hit rate. Every single application that came along wanted to get rid of the HRD page or customize it to look like their app, and realize that no two apps at Microsoft look alike. Okay? So they wanted to use ADFS. They did not want to deploy their own ADFS servers because they wanted to use claims, and they didn't want to have to deal with the high availability requirements and everything else that we take care of. But they had a bunch of requirements for us. One, they wanted to make it look however they wanted to make it look. It needs to be a seamless experience. Sometimes they wanted to customize what options were shown. So, for example, I only want Live ID users to be shown, or I want to auto-select Microsoft employees, or whatever the case may be. The biggest feedback that we had was, how can we make HRD so it doesn't render its own page? This was big. It turns out, at least in my world, that people don't care if you're on a page and you have to click 13 things on that page to do something. But if you click something and it loads a new page, that's bad. I don't understand the difference, but I go with it. Okay? So we didn't want to have to do page loads. Again, predictable and consistent experience is key. Okay? So we had two solutions for this. The first solution, and the way that we approached this was we said short-term and long-term. This was early last year. The short-term solution was we offered a co-branded home realm discovery technique. The long-term solution was we went to the ADFS team and said, please, please, please help us and fix your product. And they did. So we'll talk about that as the second solution. But the co-branded HRD technique was really interesting because we learned a lot, and we've even applied this in other scenarios. We've reused this. So what we did was we knew that because of the web.config, when you load the HRD page, that it's always going to load that one ASP.NET page. Okay? HRD.ASPX. The first thing we had to do was figure out if we could differentiate per application. And it turns out that we could. And this little code snippet was how you identify an app. Now, when you onboard an application to ADFS, the application can have many URLs and things like that, lots of pages within. But any given app has a single identifier. And that identifier is in the WT realm parameter in the query string. That single identifier is fixed. It's in your ADFS config. It's in the config of the application. When the application redirects the user to the ADFS server, it's the WT realm parameter that identifies to the ADFS service what application that user's trying to access. Regardless, there are other parameters that will specify, what page inside of the app they're trying to go to, right? So if there's deep links or anything like that. Once we realized that, we said, hey, we can use WT realm as the key in our config file to say this application gets this kind of behavior. Perfect. That was the first technique that we had to sort out. The second thing that we had to do was figure out how you render a different page for a different application each time. This was a little bit unusual for us. You also have to understand that we're not developers. We're infrastructure people. And there's lots of developers at Microsoft, but none of them want to talk to the infrastructure people. Okay? So we're just sitting there, we crack open Visual Studio, and we start hacking around and start discovering things. And one of the things that we learned was there's ASP.NET pages, but there's also this concept of ASP.NET user controls. And a user control is effectively a component or a set of code that is intended to be reused. Usually you see this as like a menu or something. It's like a little box that's consistent across every page in a site, right? However, what we've realized was that we could take a user control and load it into the page and make the user control equal to 100% of the size of the page. And it looks just like the page. Okay? Now, when we did this, there was a little bit of trickiness because of the way that ADFS has declared their select home roam parameters. So if you start to do this, one of the things that you realize is that within this user control, you load your buttons that say, you know, login as AD, or login as live ID, or login as, you know, whatever. And you actually have to get that command back to the ASP.NET page. And so these little code snippets are what's required to be able to make it so that those button clicks actually get resubmitted back to ADFS. But this is blue-green boxes. What does this actually look like? Well, here was one example, one of our early versions of our default ADFS HRD pages. Right? You can see that we still had Microsoft user, live ID user, federated user with the email lookup box. But this is just rendered as a control on the ASP page. This was another one. Same server, same page, same components. But this way, when the user went to the Microsoft OEM application, they got the default landing page, they hit sign in, it went to this page, and they didn't feel as though they had left the app. If you looked at the URL, you would find out that you had been redirected to the ADFS server, but nobody looks at the URLs. So this way, we had a consistent experience. This was the new page that we put together that I showed earlier. Again, this is just dropped in, same page, different application, right? This is our new default. And then this was a fourth example. This was one of our applications called Explore.ms that, again, their requirement was that they wanted the user to have the consistent experience when they went to the logon page. They wanted to own what this UX felt like. But they also wanted to do something else. They didn't want to show all the options. They didn't want to give everybody the option, or give everyone the option to choose between AD or Live ID or Federated Partner or whatever. This was a challenge. Okay? And the reason that this is a challenge is because think back to the cookie and the caching behavior. And when does the HRD page render? Well, the HRD page doesn't render every time the user goes to an application. The HRD page only renders if the server doesn't know where to send the user to, right? So, if I back up for a moment, if the user had gone to our OEM application and they selected, I'm a federated partner, and they typed in joe@dell.com, we cookied that they belong to Dell. When they go to Explore MS, we're not going to show this page. We're not giving them that option. We're just going to send them to Dell.com. Because inside of their browser, was this cookie. And if you want to see what this cookie looks like, you pop it open, and base64 encoded is where the user's going to. Now, why did I suddenly go super deep to show this? Because this is one of those fun things that you could also go in and crack open this cookie from the server and modify if you need to, because this is how it's written. Okay? So you could go in and actually change this value. But this wasn't going to work for us. So with the October 2010, the May 2012 release of the ADFS Rollup 2, link up there. We were able to get a fix for ADFS that allows us to tell our applications, you know what? If you don't like the way that we do HRD, do it yourself. Manage it. Not our problem anymore, okay? We're going to give a default home realm discovery experience. And if you have any feedback whatsoever, take it to your developers, and here's the doc. Tell them that they can just build it, okay? Now, we don't need to host this anymore, okay? Because what we do is we can use a parameter that's called the WHR parameter. Now, just briefly, why did we need this fix? Reason we needed this fix was because without this fix, if an application uses the WHR parameter, the ADFS service stomps on their cookie. That's bad. Imagine a case where user goes to application 1 and decides that, and indicates that they log in at Dell. Great. The same user in their browser, they have a cookie that says they log in at Dell, but they go to application 2. And application 2 passes a WHR parameter that says log in at live ID. Not only does the ADFS service redirect them to live ID, it stomps on their cookie and resets their cookie to live ID. When they go back to that first application where they needed to log in at Dell, they can't. They can't get back there because we never re-render the HRD page because they have the cookie. Okay? So this was an important fix for us. So if this was the approach, then what was the app behavior change? The app behavior change originally looked something like this. I go to my application. My application has a default anonymous landing page with a sign-in button. That sign-in button redirects me to home realm discovery. Yay. Now, I go to the application. The application can decide, here's how I want to, please tell me how you log in. If you choose Windows Live ID, then when it redirects to ADFS following the exact same pattern that we looked at before, it's going to include this query string parameter called WHR that says, ADFS, this user wants live ID. And we'll just redirect them. It's silent. We don't need to do HRD anymore. The application did it for us. So this way, you can see that the applications can manage this. Now, who's seen this before? Probably everybody. Why? Because you see this approach all the time on consumer sites. We jokingly refer to it as the NASCAR page. Of course, being in Europe, I'm wondering, everyone knows what NASCAR is, right? Yeah, the race cars. See, because unlike Formula One so much, we take our cars and we plaster them with stickers, right? Well, now we're plastering the page with stickers. And usually you see this on consumer sites in the form of, do you want to log in with your Twitter account, your Live ID account, your Facebook account, your Google account, whatever the case may be. There's a whole, usually it's like 6 or 8 little boxes. Tell me where you want to go to log in. That's home realm discovery. That's consumer home realm discovery. We're just doing the exact same thing with our line of business applications now. Because the consumer home realm discovery, the application is doing the exact same thing. It's identical behavior. Okay? So this isn't new, but it's kind of new to us. It's taking consumer concepts and bringing them internally. So there's lots of parameters that can be used with WS Protocol. And a lot of this stuff applies to SAML as well, and you can do protocol transition, blah, 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 blah. So we're just going to stick with these for right now, though. Okay? So we talked about WHR and how WHR really solves the home realm discovery problem, because WHR is what identity provider am I going to log in with? WT realm is your key that you use when you're building your config file or your lookup table or your database or whatever you decide to do, to know so that you can start making these decisions and policies on per application. But there's another one, and it's called WAuth. So should you think about WAuth in the same way that we're thinking about WHR and WT realm? And the answer is, of course, Sometimes, right? Now, what does WAuth do? Remember back to those 4 options in the web config file? The top one was the default. WAuth lets an application specify any of the others. Why is this important? This is important because most mobile devices can't do Windows Integrated Auth. But many mobile devices are starting to be allowed on corporate networks, or at least allowed onto partial corporate networks, right? You know, somewhat restricted access. So if you have an application that's intended and targeted for mobile devices, then you don't want to have that application, or you want the application to use ADFS, but because it's on your internal network, you don't want the default of Windows Integrated Auth. So how does the application specify, hey, for me, render the forms-based logon page? Because for a mobile device, I know that ADFS is already going to detect that it's mobile and render the fancy, well, you know, easy to use forms-based logon page as long as it knows. And so the answer is, for mobile applications, this has really become the critical setting. Now, I said that there was the May 2012 update, but there was also an October 2011 update. Yes, you need them both. Now, what these roll-ups did was these roll-ups have fixed a lot of things. Usually they contain a bunch of bug fixes and performance enhancements and things like that, but they also include new features. Some of the features, like in the May update, included the WHR behavior that allowed us to unwind our homeworld discovery nightmare. In the October release, we included client access policies. Client access policies were really powerful because client access policies introduce new claim types for us. And they're new claim types that we could use to make some pretty cool authentication and authorization decisions. The new claim types are here, but really the only one that I'm kind of focusing on for customization scenarios is that top one, that XMS proxy. Because what this new claim type does is it allows you to build claims rules that are different based on whether the user is coming from the internet via a proxy, via an ADFS proxy, or if they're directly hitting the internal STS, the internal ADFS server. Now, why would I want to do that? Because it lets me come up with all kinds of neat variations on how I can apply security policies. From a customization perspective, it's this one that becomes important. Because I've already got a security policy that says if you're coming in and accessing a resource from the network, or accessing a resource from the internet, you need to log in with two-factor auth, smart cards. And if you're coming from the corporate network, you can log in with a username and password. Well, how do we do two-factor auth? If we take these client access policies, and we take that WAuth parameter, and we mix them all together with a little bit of ASP.NET and some user experience, we start to enable a solution for step-up authentication and enabling two-factor auth for ADFS. We do need a couple of other features. In Server 2008, I believe, possibly 2008 R2, we introduced a feature for Active Directory and PKI called Authentication Assurance, or Authentication Mechanism Assurance. Effectively, what Auth Assurance did was it let the PKI team take the smart card template and map an OID in the smart card to a security group in AD. This was pretty good because this lets you do something like if the user if the user's token contains this security group, which we can do in ADFS, we do this all day long, then we know that they logged in with the smart card. And that's one of the keys that we're trying to find. Okay? So we're taking all of these things that we've built up to now for an application identified by its WT realm. if the user came from a proxy server identified by the XMS proxy claim, they must have logged on with a smart card identified by their auth mechanism assurance by the presence of that SID in their token. Okay? But what happens if they don't? If they did not log in with a smart card, then we throw a deny, which just goes to the error page. Okay. So what if the application team gets fancy? Right? This is your first attempt at approaching this. The application team could get fancy, and they could just simply take the WAuth parameter and specify smart card, the same way that the mobile people were taking the WAuth parameter and specifying form space logon. Of course, if they do that, then one, that doesn't actually achieve the goal of different behavior, internal or external. If the application does it, then it's going to require certificate auth every single time, whether you're internal or not. Okay? The other thing is that this is what the UX looks like. Because the default behavior of IE is that IE doesn't render the page until authentication has occurred, which means it just shows blank white and it pops up this smart card or the cert picker dialog for the user to log in with their smart card. And then after they type their PIN and click OK, then it renders the behavior. You think that home realm discovery was a jarring experience? Imagine going to an application and the first thing you see is this, right? That's not going to work. So we did a couple things. One is that back to our form sign-in page, we included a lookup that says lookup in the config information, and for this WT realm, if this application requires 2FA from the internet, then we won't show the username and password portion because we don't want them to log in with username and password if it requires a smart card. Okay? However, we also always give the option for them to log in with the smart card even if they want to. Why? Because you know what? Sometimes smart cards actually are just easier. If your smart card's already in, it's easier to click the button and type 5 characters than it is to type my username and password all up in there. It turns out that users go about 75 password, 25 smart card. But what's the behavior in ADFS if the user's already signed in? So imagine the case that the user opens up their browser, they go to application 1, which doesn't require smart card from the internet, and they just log in with their username and password, right? So they're logged in, they're all set up for single sign-on. And then they open up a new tab, and they go to application 2. But application 2 does require two-factor auth from the internet. Now, we're not going to render the form space logon page because ADFS says, hey, this user's already signed in. I don't need to prompt them to sign in again, so I'm not going to throw form sign in. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all their existing information that ADFS already has for SSO and generate a token for the new application. This is where we leverage the relying party claims policy rules. We set an authorization rule that says if the user's coming from a proxy, then their token must have that smart card security group. If not, deny. And if we deny, then we're going to throw the error.aspx page with access denied. Now, we've taken our error.aspx page, and we've got 2 distinct code paths through it, okay? And both code paths are forked on whether or not the title string is access denied. Again, kind of hokey, but that's all ADFS gives you, okay? And we're not changing the product. We're just trying to work our scenarios around it. So if the string is access denied, and we look up in the config and find out that the application the user was going to requires 2FA, then we did have to make the requirement that says The only way that a 2FA required app can throw access denied, the only authorization rules that we'll support are smart card required. Because that way, if we see the access denied and it was a 2FA required app, we'll render the page like this. We'll give them the little button. The little button is really just the link that they were going to. We've just recreated their sign-in link with the WAuth parameter to specify certificate logon. So when they click that, when they click the link, again, IE behavior. It doesn't refresh the page or anything. It just reaches out and attempts to log into the server. It keeps whatever was there. So we have a much richer experience and a much better user experience. Users can understand what's happening now. Oh, I was told that I had to insert my smart card to log into this application. I clicked next, and wow, look at that. That's what popped up. That's intuitive, and that made sense. Of course, there's another path, and the other path is what happens if we actually do throw an error, right? So if we actually do throw an error, then the error page does not, or the error title does not say access denied, in which case we just render our normal, help text, sorry an error occurred, here's some application information, just verbiage. The result of doing the 2FA step-up like that was that we were able to provide sort of the end-to-end step-up user authentication experience. But we've also taken all of these different sort of techniques, using the WT realm, using WHR for HRD, and using ASP.NET controls on pages to render different experiences, using CSS to be able to render mobile versions versus full browser versions. Combining the features of Windows Active Directory, AD certificate services, and ADFS to do two-factor auth. Putting all of these things together, we've been able to deliver a comprehensive solution that has achieved one of the most important goals that I have on my day-to-day work, which is getting people to leave me alone. Right? So, if you have any questions about this, let me know. One of the questions that is really common is, where can I get the code for that? And the answer is, we're going to be publishing this on Codeplex. We need to go through a little bit of anonymization first. But our customization code will become available on Codeplex to enable all of these scenarios. We're also working with the ADFS team to help unhokey some of the hokiness that's in some of these solutions. But I appreciate everyone getting up at 8:30 in the morning on Friday, and I hope the TechEd's been valuable, and thank you all for sitting through this.